I was less than an hour from home when the highway started to feel unstable, in a way that made me grip the wheel tighter than normal. It was late January, already dark, and a storm was cutting across a back highway in northern Vermont, faster than anyone expected. The temperature had dropped so quickly that the snow on the road had fused into a sheet of packed ice, and every car around me was moving like it didn't fully trust the surface underneath. Both lanes were covered in uneven white, the kind that hides black ice under a thin layer of powder. The plows had been through earlier, but new snow kept filling everything in again. Every time a truck passed in the opposite direction, the blast of powder from its tires erased my windshield for a full second before the wipers cleared it. Each second felt longer than it should have. I stayed in the right lane with the rest of the cautious drivers. The left lane was mostly empty. Anyone who tried to use it kept drifting sideways before pulling back in line. I dropped my speed to around 35 and stayed behind a dark Subaru Outback that kept tapping its brakes even when nothing was happening. In any other situation, I would have passed it. In this storm, I didn't blame the driver for being tense. The wind came from the left, pushing snow across the highway in fast, sweeping bursts. The reflectors on the median were buried. The shoulders weren't visible at all. It felt like driving through a tunnel carved out of moving white noise, with no reference points except brake lights. About 15 minutes into this, the traffic ahead began behaving differently. The brake lights didn't fade on and off gradually, like they normally do when everyone slows together. Instead, they flared, sudden, bright, urgent. A line of red stretched across both lanes and stayed there. I let off the gas immediately and pressed the brakes lightly. The ABS kicked in before I even felt the pedal sink. My car slowed, but not fast enough. The Outback in front of me braked hard and began to rotate just a little. Its back end slid toward the left, like gravity had tilted the whole highway. Through the falling snow, a dark vertical shape appeared. At first, it didn't look like anything recognizable, just a shadow crossing both lanes. Then the wind shifted, and the headlights caught the flat metal surface of a trailer. A tractor trailer had jackknifed sideways across the interstate. The cab was buried in the snow on the far side. The trailer was stretched from guardrail to median like a wall. The Subaru ahead of me tried to correct, but the road had no grip left. It slid at an angle that made it clear the driver wasn't in control anymore. I felt the instinct to brake harder rise instantly, but I knew that would send me into the same spin. I steered right toward the shoulder, hoping for deeper snow that could slow me down. The car drifted more than it drove, gliding sideways just enough to make my stomach drop. The tires hit rougher snow near the rail, and that was enough to pull me to a stop. I ended up half on the shoulder, half in the lane, facing the side of the trailer at an angle. Behind me, a pickup had been following too closely. It didn't have a chance. I heard its tires lose traction, then the heavy, solid sound of metal crushing metal. The Subaru was pushed forward into a worse position, blocking more of the lane. Another impact followed from farther back, then another. The chain reaction spread fast. Car after car slid into the pile, each one hitting slightly offset from the last. The headlights behind me swayed at odd angles before freezing in place. For a moment, everything stopped. Engines idled unevenly. Hazard lights blinked everywhere, scattering red flashes across the snow. Nobody honked. Nobody yelled. It was like everyone realized at the same time how damaging the next mistake could be. I opened my door carefully and stepped out. The cold was immediate and sharp. The shoulder felt uneven under the snow, and I stayed next to the guardrail so I wouldn't slip downhill. The wind kept blowing drifts across the pavement, partly burying some cars within minutes of stopping. From where I stood, The pileup looked worse than it had from inside the car. Some vehicles sat straight, wedged against each other. Others were turned sideways, blocking entire sections of the highway. One SUV rested nose down against a compact car's trunk, its wheels lifted off the ground. A minivan had ended up halfway across both lanes, with its sliding door pushed inward from an impact. People began stepping out slowly, one car at a time. Most stayed near their doors with their hazard lights flashing, unsure if more vehicles were going to slide in from the back. A few called out to ask if others were hurt. The answers were short and tense, but controlled. No panic, just the kind of shock that comes from understanding how close things came to being much worse. Through the blowing snow, a faint glow appeared on the horizon, red and blue lights pushing through the storm. They seemed far away at first, moving slowly, fighting the same conditions we had. When the first state trooper SUV reached the back of the pileup, the troopers got out and walked toward us, using flashlights to check each vehicle. They knocked on windows, opened doors that weren't jammed, and took quick notes on who needed help. Paramedics arrived next. They moved efficiently, steady even when trudging through snow up to their shins. They checked injuries I couldn't see and marked vehicles with small strips of reflective tape. Tow trucks lined up behind them, waiting for clearance to start pulling the wrecks apart. A trooper reached me and asked what I had seen. I told him about the sudden wave of braking, the trailer appearing sideways through the snow, the Subaru spinning, and the pickup hitting it. He wrote it all down. His calmness made the whole situation feel even more surreal. It took hours to clear everything. The storm didn't stop, and snow piled on top of the damaged cars, softening their shapes until they looked like covered mounds instead of vehicles. Tow trucks winched cars out one by one, dragging them into lines along the shoulder. More emergency vehicles arrived with chains, cones, and barriers until the highway looked like a temporary construction site, lit only by flashing lights and drifting snow. By the time they released the drivers whose cars could still move, the scene had transformed. The truck was gone. Many cars were gone. What remained were deep gouges carved into the snow along the guardrail, broken pieces of plastic frozen into the ice, and black streaks on the pavement where tires had slid without grip. A couple of miles down the highway, everything looked untouched again. Fresh tire tracks cut clean lines through the snow. Oncoming drivers passed without slowing, unaware of the disaster just behind them. There was nothing unusual about the cause. No reckless driver, no chase, no sudden obstacle planted on purpose. It all came down to ice, low visibility, and one truck losing control at the exact wrong moment. There was nothing supernatural about it, nothing cinematic, just physics, timing, and the reality that on winter roads, you can go from cautious to trapped in a matter of seconds, and all you can do afterward is be grateful you were able to step out of the car at all. I was driving north through upstate New York near the Canadian border late in January, trying to get ahead of a snowstorm that kept growing on the radar. The last stretch of highway before the village was covered in drifting snow, and the wind pushed the car sideways anytime I went faster than 40. I had planned to reach Vermont that night, but the storm wasn't slowing down, and I was getting more anxious with every mile. When I reached a tiny border village, just a bar, a gas station, and a short row of old motel rooms, I pulled in to get warm and figure out whether it was smart to continue. The parking lot was frozen solid and half covered in new snow. Under the metal awning near the bar entrance, a young couple stood close together, bundled up, watching the snow blow across the lot. Inside, the bar was overheated and dim. A few locals were nursing drinks, and a hockey game played on mute. I sat near the window with a coffee, looking out at the storm building across the street. Every minute, the visibility dropped a little more. At the counter, an older man kept glancing outside. Not at the storm, at the couple under the awning. His attention wasn't dramatic, but it was steady enough that I noticed. After half an hour, I made up my mind. I wasn't driving any farther. The motel next door looked run down, but anything was better than sliding off the highway in the dark. I paid, zipped my jacket, and stepped back outside. The cold hit hard. The couple under the awning immediately looked toward me. The man took a step forward like he'd been waiting for someone to walk out. The woman stayed slightly behind him, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets. They asked where I was heading and said they were trying to get to a lodge past the village. They said the GPS kept looping them around back roads that weren't plowed. They wanted to know if I knew a faster path, specifically a shortcut behind the buildings that would connect to the main road. They pointed to a narrow, snowed-in path between the bar and the motel. It was dark, unlit, and half-blocked by drifts. The only visible tire tracks were old. Before I could answer, the bar door opened behind me. The older man stepped out just enough to meet my eyes and gave a small gesture with his hand, a clear warning to stay where people could see me. He didn't say anything loud. He didn't explain. He just held the look for a second and went back inside. The couple didn't seem to notice. They kept insisting the back path was the quickest way out of the village. They said it would take a minute if someone who wasn't lost walked with them just far enough to confirm the right turn. They made it sound harmless. They sounded tired and frustrated, not threatening. But something about the situation didn't line up. The main road was bright, open, and plowed. The path they wanted me to take was the exact opposite, blind, unlit, and leading behind the buildings where no one could see anything. The more they explained, the more focused they became on getting me into that specific spot. I told them I was checking into the motel and needed to get to the office. I kept my voice neutral and walked toward the front. The man followed for a few steps before stopping, annoyed. The woman touched his arm and said something quiet I couldn't hear. I crossed the lot quickly. The snow had turned the pavement into uneven ice, and the wind kept sweeping more across my boots. I checked behind me a couple of times. The couple stayed near the awning at first, then drifted slowly toward the side of the building, the direction of the dark path they had wanted me to walk through. Their SUV was parked at the far end of the lot, engine off, covered in a thin layer of snow. The motel office was warm but empty except for the clerk. When I checked in, she warned me not to walk behind the buildings at night because there had been issues in the unlit lots. She didn't specify what kind of issues. She said it casually, like someone pointing out black ice. I walked to my room with the key card in hand, scanning the edges of the lot. The couple was no longer under the awning. Their tracks disappeared around the corner between the motel and the bar, right where they had wanted me to go. Inside the room, I locked the door and checked the window. From that angle, I could see only the main lot and the neon sign from the bar reflecting off the snow. I couldn't see the back path at all. The heater rattled every few minutes, and every time it shut off, the room fell into heavy silence. I stayed awake longer than I meant to. The wind made the siding creak, and the storm covered new footprints fast. I kept thinking about the older man's warning. Nothing he did was dramatic, but it was intentional. He didn't want me stepping out of sight, and the couple's pushiness had shifted in a way that didn't fit their story. They weren't asking for help. They were trying to get me to a place where visibility dropped to 0. I finally fell asleep around 3. When I woke up, the storm had slowed but hadn't stopped. Fresh snow covered almost everything. The couple's SUV was gone. The entire area behind the buildings looked untouched again. Smooth snow with no signs anyone had walked through it recently. Before leaving, I went back to the bar for a coffee. The older man was there again, sitting in the same spot. When he saw me, he gave a small nod, like confirmation that I had made the right choice. He didn't ask what happened, and I didn't ask him what he'd seen the night before. Nothing needed to be explained. I left the village slowly, taking the main road north. The storm had weakened, but the sense of unease didn't. The highway felt safer than that small parking lot had, even with the snow still blowing across it. Nothing happened that night. Not officially. No police reports. No noise in the dark. No confrontation. But the whole situation hinged on a single decision. One step into the wrong place, out of sight, and I don't know how it would have ended. Sometimes the worst danger isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's hidden in the places where no one's looking. I was driving through upstate New York in the middle of a bad, cold snap, heading toward a small mountain town where I had booked a cheap room for the night. It was supposed to be a simple 3-hour trip, but the wind kept pushing sheets of loose snow across the pavement, turning everything into a blur of white and distant headlights. I had the heat blasting, the wipers working non-stop, and still felt like I was driving inside a freezer. About halfway through the stretch of forest road, I passed a small rest area, the kind with 2 picnic tables, a trash can, and nothing else. Normally, I would never stop there, especially at night, but I needed a break. My phone had dropped service miles back, and I was starting to feel boxed in by the storm. I pulled into the narrow lot and shut off the engine. Snow hammered the windshield, and the cold air crawled into the car as soon as I opened the door. There were no other vehicles, no lights, no noise except the wind scraping across the trees. I walked around for a minute, stretching my legs. The rest area was half buried, the benches covered in a thick layer of ice. I was about to get back in my car when I noticed movement near the far end of the lot. A figure walking slowly toward me from the tree line. A man in a heavy coat and knit hat stepped into the glow of my headlights. He wasn't limping. He wasn't acting strange. He just looked cold, with snow covering his shoulders and gloves. For a second, I thought maybe he was a hiker who got caught out too late. It wouldn't be the first time someone underestimated mountain weather. He stopped a few feet from me. He didn't wave or shout. He just stood there like he expected me to fill in the silence myself. I asked if he needed help, and he nodded once, pointing back toward the forest. He gestured in a way that looked like he was trying to explain that his car had died somewhere behind the tree line. There was no way to confirm what he meant. I couldn't see anything back there, not even footprints. The wind had already erased them. He tapped the passenger door of my car gently with his knuckles. Not demanding, not aggressive, just a suggestion. The situation wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't simple either. I was in a dead zone with no service, miles from any town. Leaving someone stranded in that weather felt wrong, but letting a stranger into my car in the middle of nowhere felt worse. I shook my head and pointed toward the main road, trying to indicate that I needed to keep moving. He didn't step closer. He just lowered his hand, as if accepting the refusal, and looked down at the snow for a moment. Then he did something that made the whole moment shift. He pointed directly at the sky, the thick moving wall of snow, and then pointed again toward the forest. He wasn't asking for a ride to town. He seemed to be asking for a ride to anywhere that wasn't where he'd been. He wasn't stranded. He was avoiding something. I got back into my car slowly, watching him through the windshield. He didn't try to open the door or speak. He just stood there, waiting to see what I would do next. I turned the ignition. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he stepped forward again, placed one hand on the hood, lightly, with no force, and stared directly through the windshield. Not angry, not pleading, just tired. Tired in a way that made the storm look worse. I didn't know what to make of it. Was he in trouble? Was someone chasing him? Was he a danger to me? There was no way to tell. He was just a man in a storm, asking for help in the quietest way possible. I shifted into drive. He stepped back without hesitation, as if he had expected me to leave. I pulled out of the rest area slowly, checking my mirrors. For a few seconds, he stood in the same spot. Then he turned and started walking along the shoulder of the road in the opposite direction from me. I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving him there was a mistake, but picking him up might have been one too. About 10 minutes later, the road dipped down a hill where trees blocked most of the wind. My hands were still tight around the steering wheel when I saw something through the falling snow, flashing hazard lights ahead. A sheriff's SUV was parked sideways across the road. A uniformed officer waved me down with a flashlight. I rolled the window halfway, letting freezing air blast into the car. He told me the road was being temporarily closed because deputies were searching for someone who had abandoned a vehicle further up the mountain. When I asked if he meant a stranded driver, he shook his head. Not stranded. Fled. The car had been found, crashed into a guardrail with the engine still running and the headlights smashed. They believed the driver had run into the woods to avoid police contact. The officer asked if I had seen anyone walking along the road. I hesitated, not because I wanted to lie, but because I suddenly realized there was no version of the truth that made anything better. If I told them about the man at the rest area, they would ask why I didn't help. If I hadn't helped, they would ask why. And if the man wasn't dangerous at all, I'd be dragging him into something bigger. I just shook my head. The officer let me pass after giving me a detour route. As I drove away, the rest area appeared again in my mind. The empty lot, the man standing in the snow, the look on his face when he tapped the hood. Not desperate, not manipulative, just someone who wanted to be anywhere except where he'd been. For the next hour, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting headlights to appear behind me, or someone walking along the shoulder. But the storm swallowed everything. There was nothing to see but snow. When I finally reached the small inn I had booked, I sat in the car for a minute before going inside. I kept thinking about how quietly that man had asked for help. No begging, no panic, just a silent request from someone who didn't want to stay where he was. I'll never know what happened to him or what he was running from, but I know that on winter roads, danger doesn't always come from someone trying to get in your car. Sometimes it comes from the decisions you make, when the only witness is the storm itself.